Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini conference. I'm your host, Sayal Hur. This mini conference is composed of a few panel conversations focused on the real world application of timeless wisdom. The backdrop is that we are in a world experiencing a leadership crisis on a global scale across various dimensions, both personal and professional, private and public, among many other dimensions, resulting in widespread struggle and suffering. Much of what we're experiencing stems from embracing an almost Pollyannish perspective that romanticizes leadership, human nature, and reality, sterilizes our organizations and enterprises, and infantilizes people in leadership roles, among others. When in reality, we should be embracing a more realistic perspective that integrates every aspect of human nature and reality, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Art of War, or the Sun Tzu, provides profound, timeless insights into leadership, strategy, culture, conflict, execution, and much more, offering approaches for surviving and thriving in today's reality. The objective of these conversations is to engage a few forward thinkers and forward doers who are reshaping the modern world through the wisdom of the art of war, to explore the gap between principles and practice where reality and theory converge, to explore applying ancient wisdom to modern day scenarios, highlighting the dynamics between intentions and outcomes, and to illuminate insights for engaging in challenging environments. Welcome to the Art of War in the Wild mini conference.
Hello and welcome to everyone who is able to join us for today's live stream. This is the second gathering, if you will, of the Art of War in the Wild, panel number 2, brought to us by Sai, my good friend Al here, who organized this mini conference event in online spaces for both LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm not sure where else we're streaming to, but you can definitely tune into us on those. This is the second meeting of this particular group of amazing instant friends that I made from the last time we got together. And so if you missed the first conversation, the first panel, you can catch it on the replay by going to the Catalyzing the Future YouTube channel and catching up on the amazing things that we talked about last time. But very briefly, we covered a lot in the last session. We spent some time, first of all, contextualizing the relevance of the art of war for personal and professional use as a means of navigating conflict in a complex and ever evolving set of ecosystems in our lives. So we see it as a fit tool for use in our work around strategy and navigating the complexities of our wild existences that we have. We spent some time exploring the idea of the naturalness of the art of war as a set of spectrums and not dyads, not dualistic, but very I don't know what to say, multivariate is or very spectrum oriented, and talking a little bit about the cultural context of Sun Tzu. The idea of taking the whole came up, I believe, in the last session as well. We may end up coming back to that again. So rich ground for conversation. Some of the things we were talking about were I think all of us bringing together our shared understandings of the art of war and Sun Tzu and how it was relating to us personally. I think for today's session, would really like to delve a little more deeply into personal practice, personal experience, stories, how you've related and used these wonderful ancient sets of tools in our current lives in which we find ourselves. So that's going to be the way I gear all of these questions. Let's go around and do some quick introductions. My name is Todd Nilson. I'm a community strategist and architect, building online communities and digital workplaces with my consultancy organization, Clock Tower Advisors, where I work as a consultant and a fractional leader around the ideas of building sustainable, thriving online spaces that are reflective of the face-to-face groups that we try to bring together for each other. That is my passion and my work, and I absolutely apply Sun Tzu in the strategy work that I do. I'm wondering if I could impose on each of you as you introduce yourselves to maybe share a fun, interesting, maybe not generally known fact about yourself. And because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, I'll say that something that's maybe a little lesser known about me. I don't hide the fact, but I was trained as a dancer, classical, tap, ballet, jazz, modern, even a little bit of ballroom in there. So a love of movement and stagecraft is work that is very interesting to me, and which I've brought to me as a series of lessons through my life as well. With that, please, let's go around and make some quick introductions for everybody. Erik, could we maybe start with you, and we'll just kind of go around the room here.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. So I'm Erik Schön, based out of Stockholm, Sweden, heading up Adding Solutions Nordic. It's an open source ecosystem for software development. I'm a strategy practitioner, and I wrote a book called The Art of Strategy, which is basically a modern interpretation of the art of war. And not so well-known fact about me is I used to be a pretty decent goalkeeper in soccer. Back in the day, so not professional level, but a few divisions, a minor league, you could call it, possibly to relate to the US. So goalkeeper. That's me.
That's wonderful, Erik, and just to quickly acknowledge, it is 1 a.m. where Erik is joining us from. He is in. Did you see you're in Hiroshima?
Yeah, I'm in Japan. So
yeah.
He gets the Trooper Award.
Absolutely. Sai, my friend, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I love the personalization aspect of the question and what have you. So definitely very, very deeply appreciated. Sai, her, if you will, definitively, I feel like I've been doing this kind of work for too long, over 4 decades of experience. I hate to say it, but close to 5 decades, as I was reflecting, if you will, since our last conversation, really helping organizations at every level go through transformations, hundreds of organizations, thousands of individuals and teams. And I focus on really helping them calibrate their business models, their operating models. Additionally, I've written a number of books. In particular, the Anti-Fragility Edge actually embodies a lot of the Sun Tzu in very subtle ways as it's been applied with organizations. So definitively something that you'll see a lot of the themes connect to. I look at myself as very much a student of life, a pracademic in praxis, as I like to say, a student of human nature and human dynamics in the context of the human condition. So eager to learn, eager to contribute. And I have to say from our last conversation, absolutely love the participation here. So thank you all for being here, and likewise for the audience for joining us. And you wanted me to contribute something. I think some of you know this. I'm very open about it. I have flatlined 3 times in my history, and I cherish every flatline I have returned from. So I've learned something. I've come back with a gift. I'll put it that way. Wow. And as my daughter says, you're not done yet, Daddy. So I'm still here. So as long as you'll have me.
That's a big deal.
We want to keep you a long time, Sai. So.
I don't think any of our private things are going to top that one, Sai.
I appreciate it. Believe me. And that's where a lot of my
you're still here.
I appreciate it. And believe me, that's where a lot of my passion and love for life and love for human beings and what's possible originates in. So thank you all again for the opportunity to be together.
I think we speak for all of us when we say we treasure you, Sai. So thank you. Yeah. Rod, why don't you go next, and then we'll finish up with Ben.
My name's Rod Leaverton, and as you can see on my little subtitle, this is the Sun Tzu guy. That's in jest. That's a joke. I don't consider myself the Sun Tzu guy, but it was one of those things where it was kind of a moniker where every time I get on calls, we're like, oh God, he's going to talk about Sun Tzu again. Yeah. So I just said, I'm going to go with it. I own the domain, the Sun Tzu guy.com. So I've been doing strategy work for a long time. But I worked at Dell Technologies. It was originally EMC, which was the storage company out of Boston, which was purchased by Dell. But I spent the last 12 years there. I resigned last year just because of a break, and we'll get into some of the private stories. I had some personal tragedies that just needed some time to recover from, which we'll talk about. But I went back and listened to yesterday's, and it's very clear that I have been not in business for the last year and kind of cooped up because there was a lot of unrestrained energy that was coming out. I'm like, whoa, I need to back it down about 3 notches.
We love that about you, Rod. Come on.
They've let him out of the basement again. So I said, I've been a student of Sun Tzu. My wife, who I'll talk about, I lost back in 2013 to cancer. She lived in China, and she got me connected, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. She got me connected with the Tao Te Ching and the Art of War, and that was and I've just been hooked ever since. It's shaped everything in my life and how I approach it. And a little known fact about me, I don't think it's a little known. I think people who know me know this, but I'm a jazz guitarist. I'm an amateur jazz guitarist. I've been playing since I was a kid. I play professionally. I don't always have a lot of time to do it, but I get out and I play live on a fairly regular basis. And if you go to YouTube, you'll find a bunch of videos of me playing out there. So that's something that I do a lot of, and it's one of the things in the last year that I've learned that I need to stay connected to. It's a very important part of me.
Amazing, Rod. And I find myself wondering and thinking that Sun Tzu would have probably appreciated jazz over classical.
Absolutely, because it's all about change. It's about dealing with literally the changes. It's like the I Ching is actually, there's a famous jazz guitarist. Wait, I need to bring it down a notch. There's a famous jazz guitarist by the name of Pat Martino, who unfortunately died here about a couple years ago. He did a whole thing where he talked about jazz guitar in the context of the I Ching. And Erik, if you don't know that, I'll make sure to connect you to that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Ben, wanted to introduce yourself as well.
Hey there. My name is Ben Mosior, and I created learnwardleymapping.com to help folks accelerate their learning with Wardley mapping, a strategy method created by Simon Wardley, and largely based on the Art of War as well. And I also, with my co-author David Hall, created a nice little deck of cards called Strategy Tactics from Pip decks. And we're all about getting teams engaged. Thank you, Rod.
I have to show my support.
Every time, I appreciate it. We're all about getting teams engaged in the process of strategy. And one of the things we're investigating right now is maybe there's a practice that needs to be created around that, maybe strategy teaming or something similar. So we're interested in the idea of not treating this work as a lone leader on a hill, but maybe more as a team sport rather than a solo activity. And the fun fact about me is going to also be musical. I am actually a percussionist. I spent many years learning keyboard percussion, so like marimbas, xylophones, things like that. But I was also in the marching band in high school and college, and still to this day, I enjoy playing drums the most, which ranges from all sorts of genres like jazz and funk to even a little bit of metal. So that's my little secret, I think. For I reconnected a little bit with my percussionist roots recently, because, as you may or may not know, a piano is a percussion instrument. Mm-hmm. And so I got an upright piano, and that has made my life so joyful, just being able to pop some food in the microwave and then sit down at the piano while it's going. And that's I think fun.
That's important.
So I hope, Todd, that fulfilled the requirements here.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. I think we have a band between us, and I'll do. You know, I think about tap dancing as percussion as well. So
yeah, totally,
we could maybe do a duet. So I thought, gentlemen, for today, to start us off, I would ground it in area that we had begun with the last time around, which was the five fundamentals. And for those of you joining us, or if you're not like top of mind familiar with the five fundamentals, briefly, they include purpose, or the way, Tao, climate, landscape, leadership or command, and doctrine or regulation, how we operate in things. And I thought for today's question, just to ground us in personal practice, personal experience, I would ask, talk about a time when you've successfully applied the five fundamentals in your work or your practice. What kind of challenges did you face? Were you explicit about, hey, I'm using the five fundamentals here, or was it just kind of a part of what you did? How did it come into play for use? And I think, Rob, why don't we start with you? Rod, why don't we start with you and kind of go from there?
All right. So the first thing about the five fundamentals, some people call it the five assessments, the five estimates. It's translated in a lot of different ways. And I realized when I listened to the video yesterday and all my excitement that I only did the four fundamentals. So I left out an important one. I'll go back and just re-summarize. So purpose, that describes, you could describe your moral imperative. There's a bigger word, the Tao, which kind of means, a leader who's in tune with how things get done and flow, which is much bigger than just vision and purpose. But, ultimately it's the scope of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then there's climate, which describes the forces that are acting on your environment, the external forces that are beyond your control that could maybe stop you from realizing that purpose. And then there's landscape, that's the terrain, that you have to navigate. So I always think that in terms of like the constraints and the obstacles that could, stop you and slow you down. And you have to, it's also about understanding where you need to build capacity. And it gets into this whole concept of Schön and Schön, which I don't know if we'll get to that, but that's, we could probably have two conversations about that. And then the one I forgot was leadership. And leadership's really important here. And it's because it's basic, and it's often described as the general, because this is where decisions are made. But we can call it leadership, we can call it the general, but it describes the choices that you make and the actions you take based on your assessment of climate and landscape. And then, but the art of war adds this little caveat, but importantly, guided by wisdom, guided by knowledge, guided by trustworthiness, courage, and even strictness. And I think it's really important here that that we talked about in our first session about how people kind of, if you think about it as a circle with purpose, climate, landscape, leadership, doctrine, people start with purpose, and we see so often in kind of management books, and they just jump right to leadership and doctrine, and they skip over the climate and they skip over the landscape. And good strategy should be problem focused and challenge focused, or as Peter Drucker would say, opportunity focused. But there's nothing wrong with focusing on problems. And I would actually, kind of in a more stern moment here, I would say beware of leaders that don't have a systematic and structural way of thinking about climate, assessing climate, and thinking about navigation. Thinking about landscape and how to navigate that landscape. Because if you can't effectively assess the climate and you don't have a structural way of thinking about the landscape, there's no way you can prioritize effort. You can't prioritize your effort, or let alone the organization's effort. And I would tell you to be wary of leaders that are like that, because honestly, they're dangerous. They're dangerous leaders. And I'm sure somebody with a military background would probably chime in here and talk about that. But I'll leave it on that, because I think it is really serious. It's really important that we understand the five fundamentals and that we apply them, because it's been around for 2,500 years. And you know why? Because it works. There's a pragmatic component here. Was I on mute?
No, you weren't. I think you were all absorbing,
I'm sorry. That was probably a little too stern there at the end, but
it's funny. Like, I was listening, as you were talking about that, I was picturing probably half a dozen films where there were, for whatever reason, British commanders who just immediately were so stuck on doctrine and regulation and approach and that they were completely skipping over landscape and climate. To say we must do this because this is the way we do things in the British Army.
You know what? That's actually really good. there's a great, so Sawyer, Ralph D. Sawyer talks about the history, and I won't go in a great deal, but that actually was what Sun Tzu was in response to, was that there was this Chinese, where you talk about, oh, I can't think of the term, but basically kind of the way you do things, and you have to do these, oh, what's the word? Boy, my mind's not, but you have to perform certain rites and rituals first before, and you have to honor those. And Sun Tzu said, no, wait a second. We're going to get our butts kicked if you keep doing that. And that's what actually Sun Tzu was in response to.
Thinking about, I know we'll be maybe exploring some personal stories in a moment, but one of the things I was thinking about too is, like, Todd, the way that you set up the question, and thanks, Rod, for going through the 5 fundamentals. And one of the things I was sort of thinking about is, like, has it ever been like a very explicit checking each one or paying attention to each one, or has it been more of an intuitive kind of swirling mess of all the 5? And I realized that when I'm teaching people how to do worthy mapping, oftentimes I will try to keep the pressure low by giving them very simple steps to do. And so there will be very specific questions we might ask for purpose, and there might be very specific questions we ask about landscape, and so on and so forth. And it's just so you get like just a skimming of each factor, just to get familiar with it and to start to learn to see it. And then over time, introducing more and more with each factor, so that they take a deeper dive in each one. And if you think of it as a loop, as we've talked about before, gradually that loop gets deeper, and gradually the things inside each factor become more intuitive. It's not surprising anymore to hear questions like, what do we expect to happen, or what do we expect could happen as a result of these factors that are in play in the market? Oh, well, we expect that someone might acquire a company, or we expect that someone might raid talent, or you start to just add more and more of those kinds of factors to the list, at least in the modern application with say business and organizations. But I find that it kind of has to start with the explicit, direct confrontation with each factor first, so that you learn about them. And then over time, it becomes less and less strict. It becomes more wibbly wobbly. You kind of find yourself naturally thinking about the factors themselves in the moment, and it's less of an explicit process. I was wondering if that's others' experience, if you've encountered it different ways, or did you get started with it in different ways?
I think the challenge that I've seen is that most people even skip the 5 factors and jump straight into execution. They just want to act. That's a lot of the leaders and managers in this world on all levels, and they've been promoted to more senior positions because they are action oriented and they make things happen, and they're not used to thinking about the 5 fundamental factors and strategy in general, because that's someone else's job, and they get a PowerPoint deck of 50 pages and just execute it. I'm exaggerating slightly to make a point, but
not really.
Only slightly.
No, only slightly. I call that practice a PowerPoint, a deck, and a wish. Mm-hmm. But I'll add here, not only do they not think about the 5 fundamentals, we're going to go that direction, and let's have some OKRs to make sure that we get there more quickly and more effectively, and we measure it.
Meanwhile, taking away all the flexibility of the discoveries that you might have along the way, being able to integrate that information. No, we've got our OKR set. Like, we're gonna keep doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you get this situational awareness by going through the steps together and visualizing it. Using a worthy map, for instance, to visualize the landscape, the business landscape, the evolution of technology and the evolution of business, and seeing that thing and drawing it together. It's like when you build an IKEA furniture, a chair or whatnot. If you've done it, you feel connected to it, right? And it's the same thing with if you draw a map together. It's your artifact, it's your object, and that makes it extremely beautiful and powerful.
Yeah. And to add to it, I think really it offers a worldview that is paradigm shifting, and the parts are interconnected, and that worldview becomes embodied if you will, if it becomes, and good leaders, I'll put it that way, and very, very good leaders that are powerful in terms of their impact, it becomes embodied in such a way that it is intuitive. And that becomes very crucial. I know for me, exactly as Todd, you talk about, how we've put it sort of into practice and stories. Every time I'm engaged in something, I'm going through the factors simultaneously to understand, what the dynamics are and what the context is, very, very explicitly, heaven and earth. And then whether there is a sense of Tao or not Tao, that's one aspect. The sense of method, that's another aspect. And definitively then who and what, I'll say, are driving some of those decisions and actions, back to kind of, Rod, what you had mentioned in terms of leadership. But once you, and I think we could all echo this, once you build that muscle, you cannot unuse it. You just, it just manifests itself in every situation, all the way from having dinner, walking into a restaurant, to walking into a large client that we're going to go do something. But it is a muscle, very much so.
And I if you think of there's a brilliant book, I can't find it, it's close by, but Richard Romelt's Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Maybe pull that up, Ben. Ben's got it there. That's an excellent, outstanding book. By the way, the guy never talks about Sun Tzu ever. Which I don't get, I don't understand, but he never does. But basically, he says the kernel of strategy is that it's problem focused, and basically you say, all right, what's the problem? So that's the assessment. How are we going to handle it? That's kind of the policies, which the leadership and doctrine figure, and then what specific actions are we going to take? And I have I'll try to send it out, but I've got an article I wrote on the 5 fundamentals and how Richard Romelt's process overlays on that beautifully. It's like, what's the problem? How are we going to handle it? And what specific actions are we going to take? And honestly, that's how doctors work. Well, some, not always, but that's how they work. And it's a very, again, like you said, Sai, once you start thinking that way, it's kind of hard not to. And I think again, we keep talking about the art of war being about how to navigate conflict and chaos. I think Todd said that, and that's beautifully stated. That's exactly what it is. And it should make you not afraid of conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing. It actually signals interconnection. It's a signal of interconnection, and it actually is a great source for information, and it tells you where to start. Conflict's not a bad thing. It's just most of us are raised to be conflict averse. And I think learning the 5 fundamentals kind of helps, is the antidote to that way of thinking.
Yeah, and conflict, that tells you that people care, right? Mm-hmm. They care about it. That's a good thing.
It's a good way, yeah.
I think in addition to especially the first chapter, there's a lot of power not only in embracing that worldview and embodying it, but then you get to the appraisals. And the Sun Tzu is very explicit, right? I mean, which ruler has Tao, if you will, is a very explicit statement. And likewise, which general has ability, and that ability to integrate heaven and earth. So quite honestly, I think when we encounter any experience, these are the kinds of questions that are running through my mind, and I would anticipate some of your minds as well, as we are looking at the landscape, as we're looking at the dynamics, as we're looking at what our own intent is as well. So very, very practical in terms of, here's a worldview, here's some of the questions to really begin to ask ourselves, and very, very pragmatic in that way.
And I'll just add here with a quote from the Denma translation, which you just said: the general that heeds my appraisals, employ him. Mm-hmm. He is certainly victorious. Retain him. Yeah. The general who does not heed my appraisals, employ him, and he is certainly defeated. Remove him.
Yeah. So, it's that direct. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's pretty clear. And that's what I was saying about, you got to be really careful about leaders that do what we've been talking about, this really insidious and pervasive, mismanagement, where you jump straight to doctrine and leadership. Man, you got to be careful about leaders that operate that way. And unfortunately, that's it's very, we see that consistently throughout the business landscape. And I'm telling you, those are dangerous leaders. You got to be careful about them.
Rod, if I could jump in on that, like to just bring this down to some personal experience, and I'd love to hear from each of you about this as well. In my practice, a lot of work that I do is I'm brought in because I'm assessing an organization that's decided they want to set up an online community for their brand or for their organization. It could be a nonprofit or B2B or whatever. And I know we talked a little bit about sort of like where we start with the 5 fundamentals, and the tendency to skip over climate and landscape or heaven and earth with that approach. I find myself actually starting with leaders and having those upfront conversations with whoever the key stakeholders are in the room, because I'm trying to assess upfront, are these people that I can work with? Like if I think about myself coming in as as a general for hire, in that kind of world, like I need to see that the people that are ostensibly hiring me to help them solve a problem are well oriented, that they have a level of perception, humility, humanity, like the qualities that are going to allow them to be successful. And that, quite frankly, because the work that I do can tend to be seen as an abstraction for them. Like, how do I start a community? Who doesn't love a community? It's a Care Bear term, but it's essential for organizations to be really well connected with their customers or whoever their stakeholders happen to be, their employees, fill in the blank there. But if that leadership team hasn't internalized that sense of humility and patience to understand that this is not an overnight thing that we're trying to solve for here, that this is longer term, it's not necessarily a short term. Like there needs to be some kind of alignment of that. Maybe that's Tao. I don't know how you would term that. But I find that rather than starting with purpose or the way or Tao or even the climate, I'm trying to assess the leadership first. I'm wondering if you've experienced anything like that, or am I thinking maybe too narrowly about this? I'm personally curious about that.
So my experience is that's sort of often a given. I mean, you have the people you have, they have the experiences that they have. It's not so much I can do about that. You work with what you've got, and you try to understand them, of course. So I worked with a pretty senior leadership team. It wasn't the executive leadership team, but just the level below. And surprisingly, they were not used to working on developing strategies. They were extremely senior, extremely knowledgeable in their domains, extremely successful managers, but it was blatantly obvious that they had never developed a strategy before. So we had to practice that muscle in steps and doing it sort of regularly, once a week for a couple of months. So it was really like a training camp for how to do strategy and how to work together on well, in some sense, abstract things that they were not used to. And the tool that was very valuable for us was the Wardley mapping, drawing the landscape together and, getting homework and getting time to do your homework and draw your own map, and then come back to the full team. I mean, working in pairs, doing this homework in drawing the landscape, coming back and discussing it together and getting this situational awareness, getting the same picture, singing from the same hymn sheets, to speak in musical terms. And that sort of was the way for us then. Practice, homework, back to school, basically. In a fun way. We try to make it fun, and we try to make it so that they felt that this is joyful and given time and space, not a full day workshop once and then you're done with it, but rather a couple of hours per week for 2 months, basically.
Yeah, that way of going about it is really interesting to me because I think it's a little bit foolhardy to think that you can come in and change someone or suddenly upload a world of possibility into their brain or a new way of being into their brain. It's very like it's a very meddlesome assumption, right? That you could do such a thing. And to reference the book that we were talking about yesterday, Deciphering Sun Tzu by Derek MC Yuen, one of the things he talks about is that, you know, the foremost thing that you have to keep in mind is keeping yourself from meddling and keeping everyone else from meddling. And I like, Erik, the way that you put that, working with the folks from where they are, and then over time, gradually building that capability. What I've seen is that oftentimes, especially when leaders are engaging in what I call vibes-driven management, which is what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, you know, this feels good, let's do that. Or they get obsessed with a new shiny, like everyone wants a community, no one wants to do the work to build a community, to maintain it, to make it sustainable. They want the trappings of community, right? They don't want the actual work and benefits. So you work with what you've got. And that's why it's always interesting to not just pay attention to the leader, so to speak, the leader, but also to pay attention to the team around the leader, because I often find that the leader is immaterial. Like they don't actually make a difference. If anything, they're just rubber stamping something that makes them feel one way or another.
That's
and
true.
That is a very large box to work within if you are a team with an intention. And so that's what I find fascinating about this, is that you can equip a team, you can help them design their intentions, learn that they can have, really just figuring out what they want, and then to execute on that competently, all within the box of the OKRs or the fancy words or whatever. And it doesn't matter, right, whether or not the leader has, you know, strategy skills, because they're surrounded by people who know what they're doing. Something I think about with all this, and thank you, Erik, for putting me on that thought path.
And I would just add one thing here. I mean, I won't say this like Derek Yuen does. And by the way, so this is the book he's talking about, Deciphering Sun Tzu. Outstanding book. And I actually invited Derek to join one of these. I don't know if he will or not. I'm waiting to hear back from him. I would love to have him on here. I don't want to be on that call because also I don't want to be. I'll just let you interview him. But it's, you know, the whole notion of correlatives, which this is Erik Schön has done a ton of awesome work on this, but this notion of correlatives, you know, of yin and yang, and it's processual view. It invites you into the dialectic. That's a component that's very different than our Western means end thinking, which we got into on our last session. But this notion of getting invited into the dialectic, of figuring out where you are in between those two areas, and you're constantly getting invited into that and having a conversation with that. And that's what mapping does. And I'm always careful because I do some mapping, but Ben and Erik are absolute experts. And I've seen them work. And that's the thing that they do. It's not about the asset or the map that's created. It's about the dialectic. It's about drawing people into the conversation and inducing situational awareness. And that's what both these guys are absolutely fantastic at doing.
Well said. So kind of an explicit example to throw in as well. When I kind of hit the ground, here's a few sort of thoughts that begin to manifest in particular. So I literally recognize the ruler, as the book reference, as the sponsor. So the first question that, as I'm encountering a team or working, whether it's a senior team or a team trying to accomplish something, whatever it might be, but whoever the sponsor is, the first question that runs through my mind, and I observe them, is fundamentally, are they aware of the natural things that are happening around them? Are they astute enough to recognize that they can't change, exactly like we're all saying, you can't change people, if you will. People are who they are wherever they are, in whatever form they may be. But number one, is the sponsor recognizing that? And quite honestly, if I come to the conclusion that sponsor and the answer to that question is no, then I have to work within the environment to actually find someone else, to be very blunt about it, another ruler who that I can then as the general interact with. So that's a question that runs through sort of my mind. The next question that runs through my mind is if I'm charted to do something with this group, then I acknowledge my own ability. I'll leave it at that. But then I look at those around the sponsor as their leadership team or as their team potentially who are charted to do something. And I ask myself, do they have ability? And that's the question that's posed directly from the book. Which general has ability? Do they have ability? And that ability relates to, of course, heaven and earth, amongst other things. Then looking at that, okay, a lot of times I can acknowledge, well, someone seems more capable than someone else. And this happens very, very quickly, really intuitively, I think, is what we all experience. The next question that I run with is, can they attain heaven and earth? And that's a very direct, again, statement. Can they integrate the dynamics of the environment with the context? So if they can't integrate and navigate the environment based on the dynamics that they're experiencing within the context in which they're experiencing it, then fundamentally, again, they're probably not going to be very good generals relative to the sponsor. So this can unfold literally within a meeting. And as I have conversations, whether it's through the pre-sales process or the initial engagement period, literally within an hour, and watching people and observing them in their natural habitat beyond that hour, I can come up with pretty quick sort of perspective on the situation. And I think we all can, quite honestly, as you hear me say this. The other questions, I literally go through them. From my observation and watching people, do they implement methods and orders, or are they just talkers? And I like to say hand wavers, because if they're just going to talk and hand wave, right, nothing's going to happen. And that becomes another fundamental question of implementing methods and being able to order, execute orders as well as delegate. And then the next question that comes to my mind is, okay, well, what capabilities do they have? What skills do they have? And are those skills strong or weak? So I look at a team, potentially how much of that team is actually viable, respectfully, relative to their skills, based on the intentions that are at hand, based on the sponsor or the ruler, and which ones are not. And that's another key question that begins to be prevalent. And I think this is a natural one, which a lot of people focus on, is this next question is, which of the team members or officers and soldiers are trained? And a lot of, I'll say respectfully to all competitors that I have encountered out there, I love my competitors because they make this almost easy. They jump directly, hey, we got to train our people, without going through those questions first. But by the time I get to the question of, okay, which team members, whether they're leads or whether they're subject matter experts, are truly trained and understand their craft. And then I'll
chime in there, by the way. And what you see in large organizations is we got to get everybody trained, and then it becomes a compliance task. And then you look at the actual training material and go, whoa, this is actually useful for these people. I don't care. Just make sure they get it done.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you see in large organizations.
And it's a huge competitive advantage, quite honestly, for me, leveraging the art of war, because I'm going through all these in a conversation where they're jumping to that training piece. And the last one, if you will, the last key question, and this is literally just going right through the text to apply this. As I look at the situation, I ask myself, whose rewards and punishments are clear? Because most organizations, their policies are so polluted in different ways, for lack of better words, that they're not clear. And people struggle with all that lack of clarity.
Is that polluted with a silent P? Or
there you go. Exactly. But leveraging, those direct questions from the art of war beyond the worldview now is very, very powerful. Looking for the appropriate generals within the team, looking for the different sponsor. And I've actually said to executives that I've worked with, after we've done some work and gone through a transformation, they said, well, why'd you work with me so well? Or why did you choose me? Well, it's because the person who brought me in was too delusional, if you will. So I had to find the right person to work with in order to have an impact in the environment and help contribute something. Likewise, if people aren't trained and all those other facets begin to enter the picture, but definitively that ordering in chapter 1 is extremely, extremely powerful relative to the worldview that we've been discussing. You have to forgive me because now I became too excited. As
that was awesome. Clearly, you've the 5 fundamentals are part of how you approach things. And I made reference to my brother, who was an extremely successful entrepreneur, and he used to tell me all the time, just focus on the 5 fundamentals. He goes, throw all the rest of those business books away; they're worthless. Just focus on the 5 fundamentals. I think I would argue that there's another 10 or 11 chapters in the Art of War that are actually quite valuable, but still.
Yes.
But you need to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, because everything is in that context of those 5 fundamentals.
Yeah, and if you ask Simon Wardley of Wardley mapping fame, he would say, well, you need to get your doctrine right even before you start with the 5 fundamentals. So you need to know your methods and your ways of working. And have that in a suitable place, so it's even more fundamental than the others. So that's pretty important to remember before you jump into various strategy developments and exercises. So,
Todd, do you mind if I throw in a question, kind of to build on sort of your?
Please do. Yeah.
I would love to hear. Because a lot of, I think people listening to us, right, will say we've been probably in this far too long, so we're speaking each other's language. The one question that I would love for you folks, and myself likewise, and likewise Todd yourself to contribute to is, what surprised you relative to the 5 fundamentals or anything else? What's really kind of surprised you? Because I think that gives us insight as a group.
You say a little more about surprise?
Yeah. What as you've been close to the work and applying it, and in your experiences, what sort of aha moments have you had that said, oh, I didn't even think this was possible, but gosh, it found me. So just surprises, aha moments, epiphanies, those kinds of things.
I have something. So I think we do a lot of tiptoeing around the adversarial nature of war and the art of war in particular. And I will say what surprised me is that after a lot of thought about this, I think the adversarial nature of much of the writing is actually what has caused me to appreciate everything I get to do in life that is not adversarial. And when I learned and when I was studying the art of war most intensely was during periods of sustained conflict. I don't have a lot of conflict, at least in the adversarial sense. I have a lot of conflict in the negotiation sense, but I don't have a lot of people who are really behaving problematically or dangerously in my life. But when I have, that's when I've been studying the art of war, and that's when I've been picking it up and understanding it. And what I'll just say is that when you know what it's like for someone to want to take things all the way to the end of a war of attrition, only then do you really appreciate all the times you don't have to go that far, all the times you can avoid that. And so you spend every moment at the beginnings of conflict appreciating how deep and terrible they can get, but realizing there are so many things we could do to avoid this and have a much better result for everyone. So
which is exactly what the art of war is. It's to avoid that.
Yeah,
so that's what surprised me the most, I think.
That was beautifully said. And I just got a little anecdote. I was driving in the car yesterday, and I was talking with my wife about this. I think she's actually on listening. And I said, Ben is who I want to be when I grow up. Mind you, I'm 20 years older than Ben. Could I share maybe just a very personal anecdote of that in terms of surprise? And I think to answer that question, surprise, I'm surprised how much I keep coming back to this material. I cannot stop. It does not let go. And I'm not going to go away from it. It's just, it permeates who I am and how I approach things. And I'll share just a very private story. I even brought visuals, which you'll love. I didn't, not slides, but I'll tell you the story. So in 2012, my first wife, Shelley, was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she was 46 years old. I was 43. We had 2 children, 10 and 12 years old. And, the art of war, as Ben just said, it's about dealing and navigating chaos and conflict. And, cancer in a loved one is probably about as much of that as I would want to wish upon anybody, as far as how we handle it. And one of the things that I learned from the art of war, particularly the rules of victory, which is this, this is kind of the follow-on book to the Denma translation. But it's this notion of disturb, not direct, as kind of like as a leadership model. And so I'll hold this one up. So hopefully, can you see that? Here's the leader in the middle, and this is kind of that traditional archetypal leadership model where the knowledge, the answers, the right way of doing things all reside at the center with this particular individual. It's command and control. And I'm not saying this model isn't still relevant. There are times when this model has to happen, period. It's important. But I think in contrast to that is what the rules of victory talks about, is more of this, where and I think this is more consistent with kind of the art of war view of interconnectedness. And this is disturb, not direct, where effective leadership is basically, I'm trying to point to that leader there. Effective leadership is about being able to sense and influence how human energy flows through a group, a network. And that gives rise to power, to creativity, and to even conflict. And this is particularly important when and I'll think about our conversation with Ben, when you are entering into an environment where there's already kind of complex processes already ongoing and you have no control, you have no command or authority in that environment, but you may have a very vested interest. And I'll share 2 stories along those lines. So from diagnosis to death with my wife, it was 9 months. And so the first story was things were not going well. My wife needed a really important surgery or surgical procedure. Everybody was getting really nervous. I could see it. I could sense it in the room. There were multiple doctors. There were multiple nurses. Signals were going on. And everyone and the surgical folks called up and said, we can't do it today. And everybody was freaking out. And I could tell it. And I knew what needed to happen because I knew how to manipulate that, not manipulate, but how to influence that environment. I said, everybody stop. And I pointed to one doctor. I said, you need to go do this. I don't remember what I said specifically. I pointed to another doctor. I said, go make this phone call. I pointed to a social worker who was a friend of mine. I said, hey, I need you to go make this phone call. I talked to 2 nurses. I said, can you go do this? 35 minutes later, my wife was in surgery. And one of the nurses came up to me afterwards. She goes, what the hell do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a professional loop closer, because that was how the art of war had influenced that. And one more story about that is that things weren't going well. And I had, at the end of a very long day in the hospital, my wife still remained in the hospital. I had gone into the elevator and the oncologist was there. And I could see he did not want to be in the elevator with me. And he just held his head down. He looked, and then he looked up, he goes, man. He goes, Jesus, he goes, every time you want something or need something, I get a call from 5 different people. He goes, why is that? And, in reality, I didn't really know, but it's because I had learned to operate this way, even because I had no command, no control, no authority, almost no agency in that environment, but I sure as hell was going to disturb it to try to get the outcome that I wanted. And I just think, in the end, my wife died. We didn't make it. And I always think of the really famous art of war saying, which is, victory can be known, it cannot be made. But that's a great example of I think how I was trying to use the art of war in a very complex processual environment to try to get the outcome that I wanted, but unfortunately didn't.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Rod.
Yeah. It's a powerful story. Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about surprises, I don't know if I have any that comes to mind, but I have an epiphany, and that relates to this conflict thing and winning. So for me, a big epiphany when reading some of the early, for me, the first couple of translations was when I finally got the point that winning in business is winning the hearts and minds of customers. It's not winning against competition. It's about winning the hearts and minds of your customers and doing awesome stuff that they love. So that was an epiphany, sort of surprise initially.
That's very powerful, Erik. Yeah, and just to kind of close this out, my surprise, I think this harkens back to what Rod and Ben were saying, is just how much this text just keeps coming back to haunt me. Not realizing that it's there. It was a text that I first encountered pretty early in my career, and there are two sets of quotes that I've typically written down, that have been inspiring or guiding to me, through my career. And one set of quotes have been from the Sherlock Holmes stories, and a number of them that just have kind of stuck in my head, over time, and have been, reinforced. But the second set was a number of things that I read in The Art of War, and weirdly, like in personal life, in games that I play, in professional work that I do, it's always surprising to me how much it keeps resonating and bubbling up to the surface again and again. I see we're just down to minutes here, and I'm wondering if we can maybe just kind of go around to everybody, give a final reflection, a final thought about the panel. Anything that's come out of it for you, or if there's some resource or idea that you'd like to point someone to. I'd love to just start this out maybe with Erik, and then kind of go around and get everybody before we close up.
Yeah, this has been amazing. So thanks for having me, and thanks for joining and all your energy. So thank you so much. I think to summarize the panel, I mean, it's about success. It's about sustainable success. That's what this manual is about, and it's relevant in turbulent times, which we are in. So it's really relevant, and I hope we conveyed that and made it come alive to everyone listening in, because it is about thriving in turbulent times, and when we all need this today, I think.
Thank you, Erik. Rod?
I think Erik said it beautifully. It's about sustainable success. And I think that's where people misinterpret the art of war. Again, I try to refer to it as the art of strategy. It is not about one-upsmanship. It's not about destroying your enemy. It's none of that. It's about that notion of taking whole and coming not way past a win-win situation, but it's alchemical, and it's bringing again, I use that notion of the soldier and the farmer. Sun Tzu's huge realization was, oh my God, if I kill all the soldiers, I've effectively killed all the farmers. So his view was one of an interconnectedness whole that he had to operate within. I think that, as Erik said, that's what this is all about. Is we need this so desperately, and I know Sai will have something to say about that, because he just believes in the importance of this book in current times.
Wonderful. Ben, bring us home here.
Okay. If you're listening to this and you're thinking that there's something here and I want to know what it is, but every time you've tried to engage with the material, you've kind of bounced out. You've had trouble with the words that were used, or the headiness of some of it. What I would encourage you to do is find someone else's words, someone who's engaged with the material, someone like a Rod or an Erik. Erik's got some interesting books on this, and I definitely look to both of these folks whenever I want to understand these concepts more deeply. I also like Derek M.C. Yuen's work deciphering Sun Tzu. It's a little heady too, but I think it's really useful. And the reason I say that is just because one of Yuen's points is that we've barely translated the material. We barely have the words for this. So if you haven't found the right in yet, keep looking, find someone else's words.
And I would just add to that. So that's one of the things that I've done is I've got about every translation, because I can't read the original Chinese. I've got about every translation, and I actually have a Miro template out there just for the 5 fundamentals, where I take all the major translators and show the 5 fundamentals according to those various translators. Some of our interpretations are not actually translators, but even Erik Schön's on there. I have Erik's version of the 5 fundamentals on there. And anybody who wants guidance on translations, that's as Erik will know, I have lots of opinions about that. So I would reach out to me, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll help you.
Thank you, Rod. And Cy, land this plane. Let's leave with you.
I appreciate it. I just summarizing and emphasizing everything that everyone has really said. Number one, a tremendous opportunity to be together by all means. And I think approaching this work, if you will, with curiosity first, and then creativity, and definitively engaging, not just simply reading the book, you have to live it. And to live it, to work with someone. I mean, I provide honestly free consulting and free coaching around this work because it's the right thing to do and the world needs it. And that is very, very key. So approach it, with curiosity, with creativity, engage it, read it, live it with someone, because at the end of the day, what it boils down to me is it's about reality. It's about human nature. And it truly is about who you are in terms of your identity and the impact you want to have in the world. A tremendous opportunity to be with you folks. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And with that, I think this wraps us up. We're just slightly over time here. So I thank you again for convening all of us together for this wonderful conversation. If you're catching this on the replay, drop some questions in for us. We'd love to keep the conversation going. I suspect we're going to have probably some more of these panels in the near future and some one-on-ones. Please look for those on LinkedIn here, as well as on the YouTube Catalyzing the Future channel and Deconstructed. Cy, any last words? Over to you.
Just a big thank you, and likewise, Todd, thank you for bringing us together. I know we're an interesting group, to say the least.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for keeping us grounded.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, folks. Thank you.